millions came into this country that had criminal records that were, some even concerning national security issues and concerns, some affiliated with terrorist organizations or gangs that have now been designated as terrorist organizations. So with that, they land, they get past the border, but they go to all the big cities, and they go into the big cities because of different advantages that they have when they come in. So we saw spikes in crime in many of those cities.
Revolution of common sense.
Revolution of common sense.
A revolution of common sense.
Truth was once common sense, but today, truth is uncommon. Explore biblical truths around faith, business, and politics with Peter Demas. Uncommon Sense in Current Times.
Hey folks, welcome to Uncommon Sense in Current Times. I'm excited to be here with Brett Tolman, who is a constitutional attorney. He's the former U.S. attorney for the District of Utah and one of the key architects behind the First Step Act. It's a major piece of bipartisan criminal justice reform legislation. He's the executive director of Right on Crime, and he's also led prosecution on high-profile cases like the Elizabeth Smart kidnapping, and he continues to advise lawmakers on public policies, national security, and criminal justice. So, Brett, thank you so much for being on the program. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Peter. Great to be with you.
So I want to talk to you because you have talked about the immigration changes and the impact it has had on violent crime. Violent crime is down. I want to read kind of the stats that I've seen, and you may have better stats than I got, but it seems like there's a 17% drop in homicides, 21% drop of gun assaults, 20% drop in robberies. How do you think immigration has played a part into that?
Well, Peter, since I've been working in the criminal justice space for going on 30 years, so I've seen multiple decades and different presidents, and it really was unique when President Biden took the helm, and it was unique among even Democrat presidents under Clinton, under Obama. You never saw the sort of approach to the border, which was, we're really not going to enforce anything, and we're going to let those that are in charge on the other side of the wall in Mexico basically be on charge in both sides. And as a result, it was astounding to watch the decline and sort of the decay of the attitude against law enforcement, and to see that there was this developing mentality that if we allow them to come in, we should treat them all as refugees, and we should not send them back. And it was astounding to me, because what we in essence did was send a message to the rest of the world: hey, send over anybody you want, they can get through the border. And what happened? Millions came into this country that had criminal records that were, some even concerning national security issues and concerns, some affiliated with terrorist organizations or gangs that have now been designated as terrorist organizations. So with that, they land, they get past the border, but they go to all the big cities, and they go into the big cities because of different advantages that they have when they come in. So we saw spikes in crime in many of those cities. And as a result of locking down the border, it's almost an immediate response in terms of law enforcement. If you talk to them, they'll tell you, yeah, we are not seeing the influx of criminals that we have historically.
But that would seem to me like if we already brought the criminals in and we stopped the border, all we're doing is just stopping the amount of bleed that's coming in, but we're not necessarily creating any. How is the impact on immigration slowing down the violent crime instead of just maintaining it? Because obviously, again, if the criminals are here, then we're only maintaining what we already have by stopping the border.
Yeah, there's a big difference, though. When under the Biden years, you came across individuals, that were foreign nationals or illegal in this country, and they committed crime. In essence, they were putting them into the system and without any emphasis on deportation. So now you have thousands that have been deported. And the emphasis, if you talk to Tom Homan and DHS and any of those in ICE that are working it, they are prioritizing who they're deporting, and they're utilizing resources that were not being used before. So it is stopping the bleeding, but it's the beginning of fixing or triaging the damage that has occurred.
So, okay, now I see this a lot where, obviously, again, conservatives are being, called racist, or they're saying what we're doing is terrible for the immigration policies that Trump has. And the answer that conservatives usually throw out is, well, if you look at the number of deportations, it's less than what we saw under Bush. It's less than what we saw under Obama. So in reality is the deportations aren't as bad. And that's been the answer. So if there hasn't been that many deportations, compared to the others, why are we seeing a decrease in crime now where we didn't say under the Obama administration that had more deportations, but the crime rate didn't seem to be impacted the way it is right now?
Well, during those years, during the Obama and Bush years, the deportations were standard protocol for anyone that came in that had prior charges. So you just had status. You didn't prioritize who was getting deported. So the difference now is there may be less, but they are actually prioritizing gang members, national security issue, persons. They are going after those that we know came from different prison systems in South America and were into the country, into the interior of the country. They're going after those that were given this almost made up refugee status without the same analysis that we've done historically. And they're pulling them out. They're prioritizing who they're pulling out, and it's not rocket science. But most will tell you if they've worked in the criminal justice space, it is a few that commit the majority of the violent crime. So with this targeted and very strategic way of implementing deportation, it's quite fascinating to see so much criticism come to the Trump administration when, in fact, there was no strategic use of deportation in prior administrations.
So, all right, and when you were telling me the story of you were thinking about opening it up and everyone treating them as refugees, all I can think about is kind of the opening of the movie Scarface. When Castro basically lets out all the political prisoners, but he's letting out everybody else, and we know what happened in Miami. I mean, Miami was a paradise.
That's right.
Prior to this happening. And then they basically he sent in all the criminals. I think we can make the same argument that Venezuela did something similar, as well as probably some other countries. Do you think that's a good analogy or a comparison historically on what's happening now, or what was happening a few years ago?
I do think it's an appropriate analogy. Those individuals that come in illegally, they're not going through a process where they gain some appreciation of the country, the history of the country, the rules and the laws that it follows. Instead, they're coming in with an attitude of, I don't really care about the laws that may or may not govern while I'm here. I'm not really a part of this United States. I'm here to take care of me and mine. And that attitude is very pervasive among those that come in illegally. Now, there are exceptions, and you certainly have individuals that come in because they want to work hard and they want to provide a better life. There's a way to expand and open legal immigration so that we get those who want to be here, who want to work, who want to, add to the fabric of this great country.
My grandfather was one. He came over illegally. All of his brothers came over illegally. He met up with them. He worked. The brothers ended up not being able to. Some of them had to go back, for family issues. Some of them, died very early on, and he's the one that kind of led our family for a long time. He ended up ultimately getting his citizenship, and we see, and I see throughout history, and again, I look at the history of the immigration, whether it's the Greeks of my family, the Italians, the Irish, the Chinese that was more on the West Coast side of it. I see this type of assimilation, but this last group doesn't seem, and I think you hit on something, there doesn't seem to be a factor in assimilation. What is the purpose of them wanting to be here? Is it strictly to escape what they came from, because there were criminals there, or was it to make money? What is the purpose of them being here, to your knowledge?
If you look at what was in practice during the Biden administration, they were not just allowing them in. and not going after them. And they were practicing catch and release and all of that. But in addition to that, they were actually incentivizing them. So many received compensation, housing, they received benefits that even our citizens don't get. And the purpose was to really shift the demographic, right? The political landscape in this country. And so if that's the case, and you're down there and you're not making as much in South America or in Mexico, and you see that they're letting you in, there's not a great risk of getting caught. That they're also, providing some incentives for you to get, your living quarters and to establish yourself. I mean, who isn't going to do that when you have, especially if you can then go in and you can take advantage of both the government and its citizens. And we saw that. We saw crime increase. We see horrific stories of individuals that preyed on Americans who were unsuspecting. And it doesn't mean all immigration, it results in criminals coming into the country, but illegal immigration has a higher propensity to have violent and drugs and other issues come with it because of the illegality of the matter.
I'm also an attorney as well, and I remember in my constitutional law class there was a case out there, or there might be a couple of cases out there, where the Supreme Court has passed on rights to people who were illegal immigrants or people that were here illegally. I don't remember, but there's some limits to that with it. I know, obviously, then you get into states' rights and local government rights, et cetera. But just on a big picture, from a constitutional perspective, how does that work? What rights get associated to somebody who is here illegally versus just a U.S. citizen like you and me?
Well, it is complex, and there's in some ways a scale. So if an individual comes into the country and they are inside the country for a considerable period of time, they can start to garner more of the constitutional protections because of the longevity of being inside the country. However, even with that, their rights are limited in terms of the fact that they are illegal. You can be deported still. You exercise a bit of limited due process rights. If they're pulled over by a cop, for example, and all of the same due process rights apply in terms of what the police officer can and cannot do. But there's some limitations when it comes to someone who's here illegally based on the fact that they don't have citizenship, based on the fact that there are other parts of the criminal code then say, if you are here illegally, then there are certain consequences. And some of those are, an easier path for law enforcement to search and seize individuals, or to bring in customs and immigration and have them deal with the matter. And so it's a bit of a sliding scale, and judges, grapple with it. The Supreme Court has taken on a few of those issues and tried to give some clarity. But for the present being, there's still a limited right for a non-citizen who came into the country illegally.
So I guess then the question is, and you talked about it, earlier. You said they were afforded benefits that citizens did not have here, and I know a lot of that was done locally, but different cities that we saw. I'm sure there was some that was state driven as well. I don't know if there was federal or not. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but why do you think that was the case? When there's limited constitutional protections, but yet we gave them increased benefits, it just seems like that just seems counterintuitive. And maybe I'm placing logic in an administration that wasn't logical. I don't know, but how do we reconcile that?
Well, their purpose was to build political power, and they wanted them into some of the cities and into the states where they could, increase their political power. I think it was a wake-up call for the country in watching over a 4-year period of time how devastating it can be on both the resources and in our communities to just have legal immigration. Basically, you had two different camps. You had the federal side, which was easing up some of the safeguards and the guardrails that we have to prevent this from happening. and then they are actually increasing the number of victims that are associated with illegal immigration. You had astronomical increase in children that were being trafficked, in drugs that were coming across the border, and that has multiply multiplied by many times its impact when it gets into the interior of the country. And then you had, on the state side, you had many cities that were giving them financial benefits in order to relocate them in these cities where they wanted to maintain political power. And and let's face it, we're living in a very a woke mentality, a very nuanced and different, where we see the loud voices are the voices that are not rational, that they are, you have college campuses that are supporting Hamas and
Right.
giving aid basically to terrorisms in both their words and in their actions, not knowing that if any of those students were in the Middle
Right.
East and supporting, they wouldn't last more than a day. And so we live in this this bizarro world in which the rational have to scratch their head and say, how did we get here?
All right, so yeah, let's move to the college campuses, because obviously there are some people that have been arrested for they either had a student visa, they had a visa that expired. They were arrested for their speech, and granted, their speech was, I think, outside the realms of protected free speech. But for those out there who are trying to understand that, I mean, the simple thing I know is you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Like, I could not threaten to kill somebody and that be protected free speech. But at the same time, there is a line, I know, with political speech, and in this particular situation, the other side seems to want to make that case. If this is political free speech and all this is done as a means of trying to censor the other side, take the hypocrisy out of it, of what they did for 4 years, and just kind of focus on this administration and this. How do you respond to that from a constitutional perspective?
Well, there's two different things at play here, and they're very different. One, individuals that are in the country through visas, they have, the privilege to be here. They don't have the right to be here. So definitely different. I mean, Secretary Rubio and Secretary Noem and all those that are sort of working together, they don't have to tolerate individuals that are going to rile up students, give them, wrong-headed information. Is that policing speech? No, it's actually saying we don't really want individuals in our country. They're going to cause riots. They're going to cause, harm to other people based on the rhetoric they use. And if they're here and, under a visa, we can revoke it at any time. And that's at play, and what is happening now, and it should happen. The other part is, how do we police individuals? And it's very simple. And we shouldn't get confused by the rhetoric on both sides. The simplicity is what you sort of articulated, and that is, you have the right to say hateful things. You have the right to stand out there and, say things that we think are reprehensible. It's the First Amendment right. What you don't have the right to do is make threats. And threats are treated completely differently. And there are multiple statutes, both federal and state, that apply to threatening language. And we have to distinguish between the two. And I think those lines get blurred sometimes, but it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be that gray. It should be fairly easy to identify when they've crossed the line from, hateful speech and free speech to threatening speech.
So I think back, as you were talking to me, I'm thinking back about, and again, another historical example of, the 68 Democratic Convention, the trial of the Chicago 7, trial of Chicago 8, depending on what part of the trial you're starting or ending in. But, in that situation, they were all charged with some type of conspiracy to incite a riot, et cetera. Yet at the same time, what they did compared to what is happening now seems to pale in comparison to what I hear and see now. Now, it could be we have social media, we see it a lot more. It's exaggerating because we like rhetoric, it gets us more likes. It could be, there could be some of that involved in it. It could be we're more desensitized to it now. But it doesn't seem like we're doing a whole lot about it outside of kind of going after the people that have the student visas, but not necessarily some of the people themselves. And I'm a free speech guy, but at the same time, there seems to again be this balance that we don't seem to understand where it falls anymore.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, actually. I think it's well said. I think you're starting to see some changes. You see that Antifa has been designated as a domestic terrorist organization. I'm hopeful that they start to utilize conspiracy laws. It's one thing to want to go down and protest your government, your law enforcement, and to try to attempt to do so peacefully. It's another thing to organize, place bricks in areas where they might be utilized in the rallies or riots. Fund all of that stuff can be utilized to show that this is actually not exercising free speech. It's moved beyond that, and it's an attempt to inflict harm both on citizens and our government and law enforcement. And once we get to that point, I want to see more aggressive interdiction and prosecution by the Department of Justice.
You mentioned the bricks. After George Floyd, it struck me as odd that it was the next day they had the bricks. They had this with the Israel Palestine. The next day they had everything already printed. It was already it was there. And the people who are involved in the rioting and or protest, depending on what side you're on it, there seems to be it's like it's set up ahead of time. It's almost like they're prepared for it to happen, but it's like no one knew that officer was going to kneel on George Floyd's neck on that moment. No one knew that what was going to, I mean, there's probably a few people that knew what was going to happen on October 7th, but so how does this happen? Like, how are they getting this stuff set up and organized? Because I can't organize a family gathering this quick. I don't know how on earth you can organize a nationwide a protest and riot.
Yeah, I agree that it's hard to believe, but in this day and age, it's very much more easy to believe that organization can happen very quickly, and if you have funding. And so I think that one of the keys is you have to follow the funding as well. You have to put the FBI investigators on those that are behind, the resources it takes to get that done. And, social media accounts is big. I mean, it's a big way in the dark web and other avenues for getting messages out. And if you are looking for those opportunities, you will act very quickly to organize.
So you helped draft the First Step Act, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it's a reform-driven law, and it reduces sentences, focuses on redemption. But on the same time, you're saying kind of in this situation, you're wanting something that seems to be more punitive in nature. How do you reconcile those two ideas behind it?
Well, the First Step Act is often misunderstood. It took some reforms that Texas, Ohio, Utah, Georgia, many others did, in which they saw this remarkable reduction in recidivism. Right now across the country, you have as high as 70% recidivism rates. And what the First Step Act did was it identified in some of these states that have been, they've been ahead of the game in a lot of respects. They identified what was causing that reduction in recidivism, and sometimes really, really enormous reductions. And what it boiled down to was individuals that are incarcerated, 95% of them get out, and they're getting out in real bad shape, and there's not a focus on doing something while they're incarcerated to reduce the risk of them committing another crime when they get out. And so these states, what they did was they incentivized them. They said, if you will participate in training, if you'll participate in, education or even faith-based programming, and then if you'll allow us to track your progress and your risk of recidivism and tailor a program to you, then we'll give you credit that you can get out early in prison. And so what it did was it took those willing to better themselves, and it rewarded them. It exempted out the most violent, and it exempted out others that, the lawmakers said, these individuals need to stay in prison for a long, long time. but it took the bulk and the heart of the federal inmate population, which for the most part are nonviolent. You have predominantly drugs and white collar crime. And it said, if you're willing to go through this programming, then for every 30 days of programming, we'll reduce your sentence by 10 days. And so they do that. And then the recidivism rate for those that have participated in the program has fallen to around 9%.
Oh, wow.
Those that are getting out of prison under the First Step Act are falling as low as 9% recidivism rate. So
that's an incredible number.
That's right. And so it's a safety measure. It actually reduces the number of crime these individuals commit when they come out. And that's what was so genius of President Trump. Look, we drafted this and had it ready under President Obama, but he refused to lift a finger to push it forward. So it was ironic that it came from President Trump, who many thought, and I guess that's the complexity of President Trump, is he wants to be tough on those violent criminals, but he also, there's a very, redemptive outlook and side to him. And I think that's what made the First Step Act remarkable.
That's interesting, because I think it's less interesting for me with Trump, because I do agree with you. Trump is very complex, and we see him on both sides doing it, even if he's painted one way or the other. But that did surprise me when you said Obama didn't want to have anything to do with this. This seems in line with somebody who is a community organizer, somebody who is wanting to reform the prison system, somebody who is, it seems to fit under that category. What was the major objection to this? Obviously, you didn't have the results at that time.
Yeah, the objection, I'll tell you what it was. He didn't want to give the Republicans a victory in Congress. He didn't want to give them anything, any success. So it was being led by Republicans at the time. If you'll recall, Obama lost the House, and we had these Republicans that were pushing it. We had Senator Mike Lee, and Senator Grassley, Senator Cornyn, and Senator Hatch pushing in the Senate. And then you had, equally conservatives that were pushing for it in the House. And it should have been embraced. Obama, ran on, the campaign trail, articulating a change to the criminal justice system. There were two presidents that have been absolutely horrific for criminal justice reform, and that's Barack Obama and Joe Biden.
And that does not surprise me with Joe Biden when you look at some of the language and some of the rhetoric that he gave back when he was a senator and many years ago as well. All right, so when we look at this, and then obviously the fentanyl plays a role in violent crime. Fentanyl came across the border. That was a huge piece of it. Shutting down the border. Obviously, we talked about the violent crime decreasing, but does a lot of that also play into the fact that that we've shut off, or not, because it's almost impossible to shut off, but we kind of slowed down at least the crossing of a lot of these illegal drugs that have been, I guess, part of these crimes that we're seeing there. Is that another factor that's involved in this, on the reduction of crime?
Yeah, there's two really big factors. One, we found out very quickly that China was supplying to the cartels most of the fentanyl. And then two, we implemented a close down the border strategy, along with designating the cartels as, DTOs, domestic terrorist organizations, or FTOs, foreign terrorist organizations. I mean, those designations has changed the way, we can respond. We can respond with military. We can respond with far more negotiating power against other countries that are facilitating this. So it's multi-pronged. We will reap the benefits of what we're doing right now for many, many years to come if we can continue this for the next 3 years.
So if people want to do something about it, people listening to it, and by the way, I'm still just blown out. Just that 9% recidivism rate, to me, is unreal. Like, that's just crazy to me. Yep. And especially because, again, even as a conservative who kind of felt that way, I kind of felt like I was on the outside for feeling something like that, because conservatives are about punishment and this, and I always felt like, well, that's kind of where I'm more moderate at, and so it just kind of. So I apologize. That just has really blown me. But when you think about this from people who are listening, from people who are there, just everyday people, what can they do, whether they live in a blue state, blue city, or a red state, red city, to help kind of support this type of reform, but also this type of stop, or to help prevent a lot of these violent crimes that are occurring right now?
Yeah, they can get involved. And certainly they can go to our website, rightoncrime.com. But you can also, there are many organizations both on the left and the right that work together. It's one of the last areas of bipartisanship. It's a recognition that we cannot incarcerate our way out of drug issues. We can't put people in forever in prison and expect that we're just going to change the nature of the individual if we're not working with them. So you can work with them in prison, you can work with them after. And let's face it, we have a lot of work to do in the law enforcement side because they're ill-equipped to deal with the mental health issues that we're seeing. So get involved, reach out to different organizations, let your legislators, your governor, your representatives in Congress know that you want to see reductions in crime and thoughtful approaches to it.
And can you give that website again so people want to know more, find out more about what you're doing? What's that website again?
Yes, it is rightoncrime, all one word, .com.
rightoncrime.com. Well, Brett, I thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you.
It was very educational, and I hope many people go and go to that site because that's some powerful stuff that you're talking about there, and we need to do. You're absolutely right. We got to fix the problem that has been created, in addition to stopping it as well. So,
Yep.
So again, thank you so
Well
much,
said.
and let us know if we can ever do anything to help support you.
Thank you so much, Peter. Great to be with you.
All right, thanks.